Chapter 3. Nutritionism Comes to Market. No idea could be more sympathetic to manufacturers of processed foods, which surely explains why they have been so happy to jump on the nutritionism bandwagon. Indeed, nutritionism supplies the ultimate justification for processing food by implying that with the judicious application of food science, fake foods can be made even more nutritious than the real thing. This, of course, is the story of margarine, the first important synthetic food to slip into our diet. Margarine started out in the 19th century as a cheap and inferior substitute for butter, but with the emergence of the lipid hypothesis in the 1950s, manufacturers quickly figured out that their product, with some tinkering, could be marketed as better, smarter than butter. Butter with the bad nutrients removed, cholesterol and saturated fats, and replaced with good nutrients, polyunsaturated fats and then vitamins. Every time margarine was found wanting, the wanted nutrient could simply be added. Vitamin D? Got it now. Vitamin A? Sure, no problem. But of course margarine, being the product not of nature but of human ingenuity, could never be any smarter than the nutritionists dictating its recipe, and the nutritionists turned out not to be nearly as smart as they thought. The food scientists' ingenious method for making healthy vegetable oil solid at room temperature, by blasting it with hydrogen, turned out to produce unhealthy trans fats, fats that we now know are more dangerous than the saturated fats they were designed to replace. Yet the beauty of a processed food like margarine is that it can be endlessly re-engineered to overcome even the most embarrassing about-face in nutritional thinking, including the real wincer that its main ingredient might cause heart attacks and cancer. So now the trans fats are gone and margarine marches on, unfazed and apparently unkillable. Too bad the same cannot be said for an unknown number of margarine eaters. By now we have become so inert to fake foods that we forget what a difficult trail margarine had to blaze before other synthetic food products could win government and consumer acceptance. At least since the 1906 publication of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, the adulteration of common foods has been a serious concern of the eating public and the target of numerous federal laws and Food and Drug Administration regulations. Many consumers regarded oleomargarine as just such an adulteration, and in the late 1800s, 5 states passed laws requiring that all butter imitations be dyed pink so no one would be fooled. The Supreme Court struck down the laws in 1898. In retrospect, had the practice survived, it might have saved some lives. The 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act imposed strict rules requiring that the word imitation appear on any food product that was, well, an imitation. Read today, the official rationale behind the imitation rule seems at once commonsensical and quaint. Quote, "There are certain traditional foods that everyone knows, such as bread, milk, and cheese, and that when consumers buy these foods, they should get the foods they are expecting. And if a food resembles a standardized food but does not comply with the standard, that food must be labeled as an imitation." End quote. Hard to argue with that, but the food industry did, strenuously for decades, and in 1973 it finally succeeded in getting the imitation rule tossed out, a little noticed but momentous step that helped seed America down the path to nutritionism. Industry hated the imitation rule. There had been such a tawdry history of adulterated foods and related forms of snake oil in American commerce that slapping the word imitation on a food product was the kiss of death, an admission of adulteration and inferiority. By the 1960s and 1970s, the requirement that such a pejorative term appear on fake food packages stood in the way of innovation, indeed of the whole wholesale reformulation of the American food supply, a project that, in the wake of rising concerns about dietary fat and cholesterol, was coming to be seen as a good thing. What had been regarded as hucksterism and fraud in 1906 had begun to look and sound like a public health policy by 1973. The American Heart Association, eager to get Americans off saturated fats and onto vegetable oils, including hydrogenated vegetable oils, was actively encouraging the food industry to modify various foods to get the saturated fats and cholesterol out of them. And in the early 70s, the association urged that, quote, "any existing and regulatory barriers to the marketing of such foods be removed," end quote. And so they were when, in 1973, the FDA, not note Congress that wrote the law, simply repealed the 1938 rule concerning imitation foods. It buried the change in a set of new, seemingly consumer-friendly rules about nutrient labeling, so that news of the imitation rules repeal did not appear until the 27th paragraph of the New York Times' account, published under the headline, "FDA proposes sweeping change in food labeling, new rules designed to give consumers a better idea of nutritional value." The second deck of the headline gave away the game. Processors back move. The revised imitation rule held that as long as an imitation product was not, quote-unquote, nutritionally inferior to the natural food it sought to impersonate, as long as it had the same quantities of recognized nutrients, the imitation could be marked without using the dreaded I word. With that, the regulatory door was thrown open to all manner of faked low-fat products. Fats in things like sour cream and yogurt could now be replaced with hydrogenated oils or guar gum or carrageenan. Bacon bits could be replaced with soy protein, the cream and whipped cream and coffee creamer could be replaced with cornstarch, and the yolks of liquefied eggs could be replaced with, well, whatever the food scientists could dream up with, because the sky was now the limit. As long as the new fake foods were engineered to be nutritionally equivalent to the real article, they could no longer be considered fake. Of course, the operative nutritionist assumption here is that we know enough to determine nutritional equivalence, something that the checkered history of baby formula suggests has never been the case. Nutritionism had become the official ideology of the Food and Drug Administration. For all practical purposes, the government had redefined foods as nothing more than the sum of their recognized nutrients. Adulteration had been repositioned as food science. All it would take now was a push from McGovern's dietary goals for hundreds of traditional foods that everyone knows to begin their long retreat from the supermarket shelves and for our eating to become more scientific.